Okay, folks, I think that's most people in. That is now 7:30, so we will just get started for this evening's webinar. So this evening's our first of our series of lamb crop. So this is focusing on the lambing that is coming, and tonight we're going to look at the indoor lambing. So we've got a fantastic lineup for you tonight, and our aim is to really bring science into practice. So we're bringing specialist researchers and leading farmers pretty much into your living room for the evening. And our kind of aim of it is to improve the performance of your flock while also maximising your lamb crop by reducing your lamb losses. So over the next 3 weeks on a Wednesday, we're going to tackle a different type of system. So tonight's indoor lambing, next week we'll move on to hill lambing, and the following week we'll move on to outdoor lambing. And this series of webinars has been funded by the University's Innovation Fund. So tonight, I'm your chair. I'm Kirsten Williams, and I work with SAC Consulting as a beef and sheep consultant. And we have a super lineup of speakers for you this evening. We've got my colleague, Poppy Frater. She's going to speak to you about ewe nutrition. We have got Graham Lofthouse from Bankhouse Farm, and he is going to speak about targeting zero lamb losses. And then finally, we're going to have Heather Stevenson, who is one of our Veterinary Investigation Officers, and she's going to speak about the health side, so looking at joint ill and watery mouth. We're obviously in Zoom tonight, and we've got the usual functions that we do with Zoom. You've got a bar along the bottom that will let you put anything into the chat. So anything to the chat, you'll see you've got the option for everyone or the option to panelists. You can send chats, or if you've got any questions, please put them into the Q&A, and we will task questions at the end of all the presentations. No question is a silly question. If you're thinking it, I'm sure somebody else is thinking it as well. So please do post any questions as you're thinking them into the Q&A. So without further ado, Poppy, I'm going to hand over to you. I will just let you put your screen on, and over to you.
Apologies for that. One moment, sorry, I'm just struggling with my screen sharing. But I think that might be coming through now, hopefully.
Yes, yep, we can see that fine.
Okay, great. Thank you for your patience there. So yes, thank you very much, Kirsten. So I'm going to set the scene for this evening and just talk through about the principles of nutrition in the lead up to lambing time. Because as I'm sure you will gather on the further talks that we hear tonight, nutrition can make the greatest difference really when it comes to preventative health management and flock productivity. So I'm going to start us off on the principles there. And I just thought I would highlight a couple of what I call resource must-haves. We've got the Feeding the Ewe guide delivered by HDB, Better Returns. And this is based on quite a wealth of research kind of distilled into a nice technical guide. So this is available online, and I will post links in the chat when I get a chance. The other guide that's just new off the press is Forage First Sheep Systems, again available online, and hard copies available from myself, so how we can make most of homegrown forage and just use concentrates and fertiliser more strategically for cost-effective sheep flocks. And then finally, a really good resource is this ewe nutrition timeline, which I'm going to go into greater depth throughout this talk. It's available as a hard copy and also available online. And of course, most of the time, really, when it comes to ewe nutrition, most of the year, you're actually thinking about grass, you're thinking about pasture. And most of the time, really, we're trying to manage it for optimal quality and quantity through the year. And the more we can do that, the less we need to supplement with additional feeds, which may complicate, may add cost, because we're focusing on what we do well in Scotland, or the UK for that matter. And a lot of it comes down to managing the grass in terms of your grazing for high amounts of leaf versus stem and dead material, because we know that the leaf is higher in energy. Even in the spring, it can be higher than up to over 12.5 ME. And then as soon as we have more dead material in the sward, that ration, as I think of it, in front of the sheep or the lambs, declines in quality. So a lot of the time, really, we should be talking about pasture. However, when it comes to, and particularly for indoor systems, which tend to be lambing that bit earlier, when it comes to late pregnancy, that's when we tend to bring in other supplements to complement the forage. And this is where this nutrition timeline comes quite in handy. So there's a load of information to unpick in this timeline, but first of all, I guess the eye is drawn to these golden days, the golden 35 days in the lead up to lambing time, which I will focus on quite a lot, and then the golden 20 days either side of tupping time. So really, if nothing else, focusing on these two periods, maximizing the quality nutrition then is influential to flock productivity altogether. But just starting here, that period from weaning to tupping time, the focus really should be getting as many ewes on target condition as possible. So for a lowland to upland flock, we're talking getting them on condition 3 to 3.5. And this is the easiest opportunity to do it because the ewes are dry, we're not asking too much of them, but it's also the most influential to the ovulation rate and the scanning percentage of those ewes at the end of the day. So scanning percentage or ovulation rate is influenced by two areas in nutrition. It's influenced by the short-term nutrition in the lead up to tupping time, and traditionally we may use a practice called flushing, where you put them on really good nutrition in the 6 weeks up to tupping time. And we know that works in practice. But the problem with just focusing on that is that the flushing response is very much dependent on the ewe condition score. And if they're starting off lean and then they're flushed, they're actually more likely to ovulate more. And then you might end up with lean ewes carrying multiples, and they might struggle to carry those multiples full term. So a much more sustainable practice alongside that is to consider their longer term nutrition. And in fact, up to 6 months pre-mating has been shown, their management 6 months pre-mating has been shown to influence their ovulation rate as well. And that is seen really in their condition score. So ewes below condition score 2 at weaning do tend to have a lower scanning percentage. So making sure that you get them up to their target of 3 as quickly as possible, and trying to avoid that too much reduction in condition through lactation is influential to scanning percentage. Ewe condition scoring, there's a whole wealth of information out there, and there's a technical note, and basically it's feeling of the fat cover along the vertebrae and the short ribs along the ewe's back. And as a sort of rule of thumb, I consider if you can easily feel underneath those short ribs, then that's an indication that they're less than a condition score 3. So that's a quick guide, but it's a case of getting your eye in on your flock to get that as much as possible. And we'll hear from Graham later on in terms of trying to get them on target and get that gauge right for your flock. But I could bring out a whole wealth of research to reinforce those condition score targets. I've just picked up 3 bits of research here. So one, this was done by SRUC, and they found that getting them on condition score targets in pregnancy resulted in 5% fewer ewe losses. Work done either in Ireland, Athenry, in Southern Ireland, results showed that a condition score between the values of 1.5 and 4 at mating time. So, for instance, getting them from a 2 to a 3, a 1 condition score is worth 10% more lambs reared. So not just 10% more lambs scanned, but at 10% more lambs lambed, and then 10% more lambs seen right the way through to sale. And then finally, some work done in France has shown that getting them on target condition score resulted in 17% more lambs reared, 0.6 kilos greater carcass weight, and at the end of the day, 24 euros greater margin per ewe. So getting them on condition score is really evidence-based. There's a whole host of science there, and it really does help stack the odds in your favour when it comes to rearing percentage. So with the hope of getting them on condition score targets for tupping time, the next area that we would consider is the first lot of 50 days so from tapping time through early pregnancy. And during this time, this is when implantation occurs. So day 6 post-fertilization, hormones influence the fetal growth and the birth weights. Day 11 to 12, the embryo is most vulnerable, and implantation is around day 19. So as a consequence of all this, we've got to try and avoid any stress, any management changes, any major dietary changes until this implantation stage has occurred. So it's around 34 days is a guide to try and get as many as possible. However, the upside of this is the energy and the protein demand during this time is actually relatively low. So we want to minimize any changes, and we really just want to get them to maintain condition during this time. The second lot of 50 days is when the placenta grows. And actually at this time, the ewes are actually quite resilient, and the egg's quite nicely implanted. So during this time, like I say, the placenta is developing. We usually scan during this time, and I would recommend condition scoring at scanning as a minimum, and separating the thin ones, putting them in with the triplets, thin twins with triplets, and any fit twins in with singles. Just to try and make sure that you're getting as many on condition score targets in the lead up to lambing time. But again, during mid-pregnancy, the energy and protein demands is still relatively low. So we really do just want to maintain condition, and we're not expecting too much more from them. And then in the third lot of 50 days, within which the golden 35 days occurs, which is most influential to lamb mortality, this is when a lot happens. So if we're looking at the energy requirements of pregnant ewes, and in this example, it's a 75 kilo twin bearing ewe, you can just see how their energy requirements shoots up in the last sort of few weeks. Okay, so the red line is their full requirement. The green line is an allowance given if they're in good condition. So it's allowing for a bit of fat mobilization within that last 6 weeks or so. And then what you can see in the horizontal lines here is how different forages might meet their energy requirements. So straw won't meet their energy requirements at all. So if they were on a straw-based diet for whatever reason, it'd be really difficult to meet you'd have to use quite a lot of supplements to get them to the energy target. Average hay will meet their energy requirements if fed ad lib, good access, will meet the energy requirements up to 8 weeks pre-lambing. So from then, they will need supplementation. Good hay, baled silage, up to around 6 weeks. Good silage can even go up to 4 weeks. And of course, grazed grass over 4 centimeters and growing for those lambing later can actually see them right the way through to lambing time. So making sure you've got the best quality forage can mean that the supplementation, time of supplementation is reduced. And just to give an example of just a quick example of how we do the maths for supplementing forage. So this is a good silage, okay, 70 kilo ewes with 3 weeks pre-lambing, and we're going to understand how much concentrate is required. And this is the quality of the concentrate, 12.5 ME. So I've gone to my AHDV feeding the ewe, and it tells me they need 15.3 megajoules of energy a day. I also estimate the dry matter intake from the silage. So they are getting just under 1 kilo in dry matter a day. So based on the silage quality, that means they're getting 10.29 megajoules of energy. So that's not quite enough to feed them, so they need an additional 5. And the concentrate dry matter is concentrate energy is 12.5, so 5 divided by 12.5 gives me the dry matter requirement. And then I need to multiply that by the dry matter to get the fresh weight requirement, 0.47, just under half a kilo. So I just thought I'd run through that quickly. It kind of emphasizes a couple of things. One, the need to understand your silage quality, because that will influence how much energy you get from your silage. And also the need to be more strategic in understanding what concentrate is required to meet that energy shortfall. And then just to show two examples, we've got a hay-based ration at the top here, a very good silage-based ration at the bottom here. And you can see, based on the specification of these forages, what level of feeding might be required. So for this hay-based ration, they would need fed from 7 weeks pre-lambing. For this very good silage-based ration, they would need fed during this last 3 weeks. So just as a contrasting example of the level of concentrate requirement on a lower energy forage versus a good energy forage. And of course, it's not just about trying to save costs, it's trying to be rumen friendly. This diagram was taken from that AHDD feeding the ewe, and it shows even just a low level of concentrate fed twice a day led to this drop in rumen pH. And this drop led to the rumen entering this region, this pH zone of no cellulose digestion. So that means even though we calculated the energy provision from that silage, they're actually not going to extract as much as they could do because the rumen's not functioning optimally. So the minimum amount of concentrate results in lower drops in the rumen pH. And you can see here a more flat line, a TMR, total mixed ration, where because it's mixed in with the forage and there's low levels of concentrate, you can see that flux is just not occurring. So it's a much more rumen friendly way to treat them. So again, talking about being rumen friendly, the guidance is to introduce slowly. So start on no more than 1/4 kilo a day and increase by 50 to 100 grams per day until you get to your target. No more than 0.45 kilos in a feed. If there's more than 0.45 kilos required, then split it into 2 feeds or more. If you're feeding straights, things like barley fed whole will result in less that any time that grain is processed, you're exacerbating that effect on the rumen pH. And making sure they're getting their feeding space requirements. Because if you just consider the greedier ewes are more likely to gorge and have issues with their rumen pH, and then the shy ewes at the back, if they've not got the space, they're not going to get the energy they need. So those space requirements are all important. And they're also important to minimize stress in the ewe, which has an impact on how easily she lambs and the lamb bigger at the end of the day. So just finally, I just thought I'd touch on lactation and just remind us what's going on in terms of milk production. So you can see in this graph, the ewe milk sort of peaking around 4 weeks and then starting to decline. And then in the green line, you can see the lamb's intake. So up to this point, the lamb's intake can be met with ewe milk alone. And then it starts to exceed the ewe milk provision and starts to eat more from grass or creep, as the case may be. And I think what's important to remember is ewe milk is often the greatest energy feed the lamb will ever get. Unless they're fed an exceptional quality creep feed, ewe milk is often the best feed it will get. So maximising the performance during this time really does get the lamb off to the best start. And during early lactation, poor feeding and low condition score of the ewes are risk factors for teat lesions, for mastitis. So during early lactation, the cheapest ration and the most rumen-friendly ration is always grass. But if below 4 centimetres, that's when supplementing can be beneficial. And also things like magnesium licks or other forages if you're low. So just to summarise, I think I've emphasised quite a lot that condition scoring is a great gauge of nutrition, but it also really influences the ewe performance. Late pregnancy is a key period to increase nutrition, but it's a really fine balance to make sure you're not overdoing it on those starchy concentrates. I think it's of value, particularly for silage, to analyse forages and quantify the energy deficit, because there could be savings to be made there, but all importantly, it means that we're maximising that forage for a more rumen-friendly ration. And during lactation, the demand is the greatest. So to get lambs off to the best start, try to coincide with high pasture production. So that's me. Thank you very much. I will look out for questions and answer more questions at the end. Thank you.
Super, thank you very much, Poppy. I have got a question that's come in the Q&A, and I think it fits in really nicely just while you're swapping screens over with Graham, and it's actually around condition scoring and where can somebody go, or how do they go about getting training for condition scoring?
Well, we sometimes put on workshops, so look out for FAS or SAC funded workshops. Speak to, if you have a consultant that can help you get your eye in there or get your hand in there. I don't know if there's anything currently available.
We do have some really good condition scoring pads as well, and they can really help. Poppy has a set down in the south. I've got a set up in the north as well. So if there is somebody specifically wanting to do it, then give one of the two of us a shout, and we can try and sort that out for you. Nothing beats getting your hands on and doing it for yourself, though, yeah. Does it, Poppy?
Yeah, and I could have gone into more detail, but like I say, like if you can, it's a case of getting your hand and trying to build up that picture for your flock. And if you can easily get your fingers underneath those short ribs, then that's a sign that they're below 3. That's a good starting point.
Super. Okay, I will let you off, Poppy. On to Graham, if you can share your screen, Graham. So Graham has an absolute immense attention for detail and a hugely impressive set of figures when you look at his lamb losses, which you'll see through his talk. I think the only thing I can say ahead of Graham is just get ready to be inspired. Over to you, Graham.
Right, I'll apologise. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes.
Right, I'll apologise first of all. I might drop in and out of internet. And obviously, like everybody else, in the middle of a storm here now, and we've lost connection completely a couple of times already. So, yeah, tonight, hopefully 20 minutes, and I'll keep it brief. Nothing too drastic in my presentation, but this is an overview of our current sheep flock at home. Lambing starts on the 6th of April, so we have a little while to go yet. Still probably, what's that, more than 7 weeks. We're looking at an average lamb sales or retained of about 1,000 per year. At the moment, we've 452 ewes on the farm, and we have 147 easy care ewe lambs and 16 tups or tup lambs, of which we sell a proportion every year as shearlings and some as tup lambs. The main things I see affecting lamb losses, Poppy's obviously said a lot about tonight already, is body condition score. I've sort of put my main thoughts on what body condition score affects, mostly down the side there. Unfortunately, I wasn't there when Poppy was talking about, so I may be going over old ground again. But yeah, ovulation, placenta, colostrum, maternal traits of the ewe when she comes to lambing. Is she motherly? If she's in poor condition, she won't be. And her milking ability. I don't think this really matters whether you're an indoor or an outdoor lammer or what situation you're in. It's the same. So nutrition-wise, embryo implantation, birth weight of that lamb, colostrum supply again, milk again, and the lifetime performance of that ewe, but also more importantly, not just the ewe, but the lambs that she produces, and more importantly, the daughters that she produces could lifetime be affected by nutrition. I also think genetics has a big influence on lamb losses. Clearly, pelvic size is a big effect. Ovulation rate will dictate how many lambs are having born. The maternal ability of that ewe, how good a mother she is, what kind of level of colostrum and milk she produces, and the performance of those lambs from that ewe will all be affected. But there's one main factor that unfortunately affects all of that, and that's the farmer. We've probably got the biggest effect on everything that happens, and that can be positive and negative. And we've all seen situations where we get it right and where we get it wrong. This was myself and a friend, Jim Logan, in New Zealand actually, and we've got a real good soaking that day, and it was quite inspiring to be up there in the hills. So getting back to lambing, my main thing is nutrition. I think I lamb a proportion of ewes outside and a proportion inside, and that's mainly due to the spread out nature of our farm. Lambing everything outside with some of our more distant land would be very difficult and quite challenging next to a village and with a main river running through the valley bottom. Pre-lambing hours sort of use a sort of 70 kilo ewe, and you'll see there I've got the base diets. I think that's really important. I like to keep it simple, and I think that's really important on indoor lambing system is don't make it too complicated. Poppy was mentioning about that sort of acidosis potential slipping into when you're feeding ewes. I quite like a kind of flat rate feeding system. I'm not so much a step rate. Well, 2 steps, I suppose. I'll be a 6-week and a 4-week step for us, and then they're on flat rate from sort of 4 weeks out. Singles maybe from 3 weeks out. Base diet there, so that'll be what we're mixing up or putting in front of the ewes, and that'll be well, mainly silage. So there's about 3.5 kilos of silage going into that diet, and about 4 weeks off for the twins. We'll have 0.3 of a kilo of wheat dark grains coming in, and then for your triplet ewes, that'll get another 0.2 of wheat dark grains in there. So it's basically the same diet. The triplets, we just basically top dress that extra feed on top. And the singles is an alternate every second day feed of the base diet and then silage, and that keeps us correct. So the big key points for me on indoor lambing, well, pre-lambing, we've got ewes just starting to come inside just now here, and we haven't actually split them up into their scan groups yet. It's because we're not really 6 weeks off. But I would split them into their scan groups. And then from that, if a ewe needs to go up or down a feeding level, I would move singles up to twins, twins up to triplets. And then for us, if you've got anything in the triplet group who isn't coping or isn't performing on that feeding regime, you should probably go outside to the best available grass that we have. Generally find that gets used to pick up quite well and gets them through to lambing time. Feed space is a big factor, I think, on indoor lambing. I think we sort of underestimate how much competition there is at the feed face. So I like to have every ewe able to have a feed space. Sort of picture there, and quite a good example, I think, is that everybody can get in quite easily. There's no pushing or shoving going on. This was actually a triplet group from last year, and they were on slightly, well, they were on wheat dark grains with a little bit of beet pulp in it. And you can see that's been top dressed on top of the base diet at that time. Blood tests, I'm not sure if anybody else has mentioned that yet, and Heather might mention that later on. I always do a butyrate test, which is a blood test on probably 20 twins and triplet ewes pre-lambing within the last month. That's a really good indicator of whether you've got enough protein and energy in your diet for the ewes in the run up to lambing. I think it's really essential to do it. I would probably do it even if I was doing an outdoor lambing system. It can give you an indication of long-term protein levels as well. So what our feeding regime has been from tupping time right through. Bedding and hygiene, well, really important on indoor lambing system. We're on straw bedded system here, and probably bedding every 3rd day with spring barley straw in the main grouping pens. And like to get, if that shed was occupied for more than 6 weeks pre-lambing, we would probably muck out, as we have done in the past when we've housed for longer, about 3 or 4 weeks pre-lambing, we'd muck out completely and rebed it. So you're almost starting afresh again. Individual pens, I've got that in here in the pre-lambing because we use individual pens within the group pens. So as ewes are lambing, we use an individual pens. We'll probably have 3 or 4 within each pen that probably holds somewhere between 75 and 80 ewes. And as the ewes lamb, we'll let them lamb as naturally as possible. I'm not looking to intervene at all. If they can birth themselves in that pen, that's great. So we put them in to the individual pens, and those pens are movable. We don't move them to that pen within the group pen. We move the pen up and down that area. And then once that ewes bonded with those lambs, we'll move her out and into the individual pens in the post-lambing area. This is a quick wee picture of our post-lambing area. Again, like to keep it simple, and you can see there's a pipe running through the passage there. It's so ewes can get water at all times. It's got a running system which goes all 24 hours a day. So if ewes coming out, they can get clean, fresh water, and it's on a flush through system. So you just turn the speed up and it flushes anything through that you want to clear out. And yeah, ewes have fresh water, which I think is very important post-lambing. Stress, so yeah, obviously mentioned that with the individual pens, the group pen. I do think it's really important to keep stress levels down. You've got these ewes in good body condition, optimum body condition coming to lambing. For me, you know, body condition score 3, and we didn't say that earlier, would be the key driver going right through from tupping right through to lambing. So yeah, if I can get the ewe to this post-lambing point, keeping stress levels low, she's moved into that post-lambing area. Lambs in her are bonded well. When we get into that post-lambing area, we'll iodine them once, either just before they come in or once they're in there, and then we check milk supply and colostrum availability. Looking to get the second iodine done probably within about 4 to 6 hours, sorry, not 12 hours, 4 to 6 hours, and we put a marker down at the 12-hour point of each sort of session of lambing. So every day, twice a day, there's a marker put down so we know where we've got to with a double iodine. Yeah, so obviously mentioned water as well. So water is really important. I don't think there's many women who've given birth who after giving birth thought, oh, I don't need a drink. So I can't see why ewes are any different. They've gone through quite an intense, stressful process, and I think water is really essential for them to have. If we've got them in a shed for 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours, clean, fresh water is paramount to getting milk supply. Any of the guys in the dairy industry would be offering cows water and probably electrolytes straight after these days to get cows up into good condition for milking. So yeah, water for ewes is just as important. Oh, sorry, cancel that. No. So base ration, so the ration I showed earlier on with the silage, wheat, dark grains in it, that still stays as our ration when they come into the post-lambing pens. I think changing the diet too much is really detrimental to that ewe. She's gone through this stressful process of lambing. She's come into that indoor situation, or the individual pens indoor. So if we suddenly change her diet and say, oh, you're going to get a kilo of concentrate rolls or something like that, that's quite a big jump for her to go through. So I like to give her the base ration still at that point. And she also gets another 0.3 of a kilo of a blend, which is similar to what's in the base ration with the wheat, dark grains, but also a small proportion of barley in there, rolled barley, just to help with energy levels and protein. Or it could be the roll, which would have been introduced earlier if it was going to be a roll, if it was in that case for some producers. Once we've got in from those individual pens, with twins, we'll go into a group pen, and that'll be after 24 hours. Triplet ewes, at lamb triplets, we would put into a separate area. We quite often turn out ewes with triplets, as long as they've got sufficient colostrum and milk. We would turn out ewes with triplets. The ewes with twins would go into separate pens, and then they get put out after 24 hours further after that. Single ewes are turned out within 12 to 24 hours of birth generally, although I am lambing probably half of our ewes outside and half inside, and all of the second cycle ewes and ewe lambs are lambed outside actually. Turnout, well, turnout's really important time. Obviously, we're all looking at grass availability. For me, if we've got 5 to 6 centimetres of grass on the ground for 5 centimetres for singles, 6 centimetres for twins, there's probably adequate feed there for those used to milk sufficiently without any further supplementation. But like last year sort of presented, it was a very difficult, challenging year for everyone. Support feeds are necessary. So yes, if we can continue feeding those sheep outside, we're offering them higher energy and protein. If I was below 4 centimetres with twins, I'd be probably on twice a day feeding, half a kilo both ends of the day. Triplets, I tend to feed those for a longer period of time. Even once grass has got to the sort of 6 centimetre stage, they would be down to about 0.3 of a kilo, maybe starting at half a kilo, but down to 0.3 of a kilo for maybe a further 2 or 3 weeks. And then after that, the lambs and ewes just on grass, although we do have some diverse sward mixtures, which those triplet ewes go on to, which does help to them better, which requires us not to put in a creep feeder, which we have done in the past. But equally, I would advocate that if you need to put a creep feeder in for lambs with ewes with triplets, I think it's really worthwhile. That ewe's doing a lot of good work, and she shouldn't be penalised for doing that. I've mentioned priority groups at the bottom here. I think priority groups is really important. So like I've said, the twins, the triplets, but also for us, we're lambing ewe lambs. This year we'll have 127 out of 147 ewe lambs lambing, scan 113%. So we'll be looking for those ewe lambs with twins, even if they can't carry 2 lambs to go out. So we'll have priority groups for triplet, priority group for twin ewe lambs, ewe twins, and then single ewes on their own. And the single ewe lambs will be in a separate group as well. So quite a number of groups, but I think it's important to split them up. And if there was ewes who were carrying twins, then I would probably put them in with my triplet ewes, because I know they're going to get preferentially treated. So I think a big factor in any indoor lambing system is keeping those priority groups correct at all times for a body condition score. And I would say if you've got them in a body score 3 and you're going out to good grass, you've got a good chance of producing good quality lambs. Popped in some of our figures for the last 5 years, and as you can see, we stay fairly static with scanning percentages. We're always in and around that 190% for ewes. Generally, I haven't put it up here, but around about 113 to 116 for ewe lambs. And mortality rates are for lambing through to sale there. So yeah, lambing, I think we're hovering in and around 7% for average lamb mortality at lambing time, and then we're averaging 8% to sale, which I think national average to weaning, sorry, not to weaning, to marking as it's put down in QMS booklet is 15%. So we're nearly half of that even to sale. And then finally, yeah, the main thing is just getting good quality lambs that are thriving. And I think with all those factors put in place, it's very achievable. Thank you very much. And that's my presentation finished.
Thank you, Graham. And your internet held on as well, which is great. And massively impressive figures there when you say like 15% is the industry average, and you see where you're at. And that is to sale. That's not just to weaning, that is to sale as well.
Yeah.
There is loads of questions coming for you, Graham. So I think we will maybe just bray on to Heather, and we'll hit you up with your questions towards the end. Okay. So Heather, if you want to share your screen now as well. So Heather is an absolute sheep vet guru, and she's really going to bring it all together. So success at lambing time is hugely driven by nutrition, management and health. So we've heard about the first two and now on to health. So Heather, over to you.
So I was asked to speak this evening about watery mouth and joint ill prevention. And when we're thinking about those, then we're thinking about preventing infectious diseases. And when you look at the figures that are reported for causes of death in lambs round about the first few days after they've been born, then infectious disease is accounting maybe for about 1 in 5 of those. And I think Graham has very eloquently set up a lot of what I'm going to say this evening. But you can see there are so many factors at play. But one of the absolute key things in prevention of infectious disease is ensuring that they get enough colostrum quickly enough, so that if they do get infected with any bacteria, then they have some antibodies from the ewe that will enable them to fight off that infection. And as Graham and Poppy have so rightly said, ewe nutrition is a massive part in making sure the ewes have a good colostrum supply and good quality colostrum as well. You'll have probably heard of the 3 Qs before in relation to colostrum. So they need it quickly, they need enough quantity, they need it to be good quality, and I would probably add another 2 things to that. I would say give it quietly and give it cleanly as well. And they need their first lot of colostrum as soon as possible, because it's within the first sort of 4 hours that they are most efficient at absorbing the antibodies from that colostrum into their bloodstream. But also they have fat stores when they're born that will last around about 5 hours and will keep them going. But once those fat stores run out, if they haven't been fed, then you will have a hypothermic lamb that could go on to die unless it's spotted. So you can see in the first 24 hours, a 5 kilogram lamb is going to need a litre of colostrum. Another thing that happens in the ewe is the level of antibodies in the colostrum falls with time after lambing and down to 0 within about 23 hours. So timing is key. And if you are storing colostrum, then just be aware of using a microwave or boiling water to reheat it, because if you get it above 40 degrees, then you'll damage the antibodies. And there's been a campaign running for a few years now, and if you're interested, if you just Google colostrum is gold, you'll find lots of information about it. So it's reckoned that maybe 22% of ewes produce colostrum that's the quality of it could be better. And when we're talking about antibodies, then we're talking about these things called immunoglobulins. And it's recommended that they get a minimum of 3 grams of immunoglobulins shortly after birth. And you'll see on the next slide why I'm highlighting that 3 gram figure. So ewe colostrum is best, pooled cow colostrum would be another option, and then you've got your colostrum supplements. And if we look at the next slide, this is a study that was published in 2020, and it was looking at the amount of these immunoglobulins, the antibodies, per feed in different colostrum supplements for sale to farmers. So I've highlighted that 3 gram level that I was speaking about with this red line across here, and you can see that there are only 4 of the supplements that are reaching that. And I think the take-home message is colostrum supplements are often really good for supplying energy. They're not always perfect at supplying the antibodies, which is why if you can use ewe colostrum, it is much better. So how do lambs get infected? Where do the bacteria come from? Well, bacteria are everywhere. They're all over in the environment. They're on our skin. They're on the ewe skin as well. They're on the ewe's teats. So pretty much everything that newborn lamb comes in contact with has bacteria on it. And it's inevitable that as lambing progresses, the number of bacteria in the environment are going to build with time, which means that your later born lambs are more at risk of infectious disease. So then, well, how do they get into the lamb? Well, they could ingest them. For example, when they're searching for the teat, if they are sucking a bit of dirty wool, they could inhale them up their nose. You could have, I've put abrasions, wounds. Now, these could be things you can't even see with the naked eye. These could be just very, very superficial. And then, of course, we've got the navel. So the navel is the route by which blood and energy and things get from the ewe through the placenta and into the lamb. So the navel's what's left of the umbilical cord. And what you've got there is a nice wet tube. There's blood around it, which the bacteria like. And essentially it's acting, if you like, as a motorway for these bacteria, as a route into the lamb, a route for these bacteria to get straight into their bloodstream. And this is picture here is the picture of a liver, and that's a lamb that's had infection go up the navel and into its liver and put abscesses into its liver. So disinfectants at lambing time are the way really to try and keep on top of bacterial numbers. With any disinfectants, they work best if you've got a clean surface for them to work on. And Graham was saying that he does muck out, clean and disinfect his buildings before lambing. He didn't mention if he cleans out the individual pens between each ewe or not, but for disinfecting buildings, if you're not sure what products to use, then DEFRA has a list of approved disinfectants online that you can access. Then you've got other products that can be used roundabout when the animals are in the buildings. Bacteria like moist conditions, so things that are designed to dry up moisture help keep a lid on bacterial numbers. And then there are sort of more products that claim to do a bit more, like your Stalisan F, which might neutralise pneumonia as well. And don't forget that treat them a bit like you would a baby, a newborn baby in the house. All your equipment should be really clean. So using something like Milton sterilising fluid is great. Only takes 15 or 20 minutes to sterilise your teats or your tubes. And have a think about where the traffic is back and forwards, between sheds, between pens. What about, for example, your worming box? How easy is that to disinfect and keep clean? And don't forget about hands. I think every household in the country now has hand sanitizer. Gloves are always useful to have handy at lambing time. So I talked about the navel as a route for the infection to get into the lamb. So what we want to do, we want to dry this out. So 10% iodine and alcohol base, sometimes it's called tincture of iodine, sometimes it's called strong veterinary iodine, it comes under various names. Make sure you're covering the whole navel. Whatever container you're using, make sure you're keeping it clean. And like Graham said, repeating it is really important. The ewe might lick it off, some will come off onto the ground. If it's a top lamb and they're urinating, well, that will wash off some of it as well. But at the end of the day, you've also got to, common sense, don't overstock. And sometimes you can have the best intentions and then the weather is bad, and if turnout's delayed, numbers of animals will build up, numbers of bacteria will build up. You want to be able to kneel down without getting wet knees, and just general sort of housekeeping, removing cleansings, the straw from round about them. If you've got lame sheep, they could have lots of bacteria on their feet. And just general building maintenance. If you've got an area where there's water leaking, a gutter's leaking, the bedding's getting wet, then fixing that will help. So we're talking about infection, then you are probably at some point going to need to use antibiotics during the lambing period. And not unexpectedly, if you look at antibiotic use on sheep farms, then you get this great big peak in March and April that's associated with lambing time. And you'll be very aware there's been a big focus in the last few years about reducing antibiotic use, and RUMA stands for Responsible Use of Medicines in Agricultural Alliance. So they've set targets for each sector: dairy, beef, sheep, fish, game, birds. So you can see their first target, which ended in 2020, was to reduce antibiotic use in neonatal lambs by 10% a year. So that was achieved. So their latest target is to carry on at that level, to carry on reducing antibiotic use in neonatal lambs by 10% per year. But linked to that, they're now also looking for an increase in lamb survivability. And one of the most common antibiotics for neonatal lambs is the one that you give over the back of their throat, the Spectam scour halt. And you can see what effect that the drive to reduce antibiotics has had on sales of this product. And even though it's reduced still in 2021, we're still looking at 5.85 million doses. But overall, because of the reduction in sales over the last 5 to 6 years, the company that make it, Siva, have made the decision to withdraw it from the market. And while there might be some still available, you'll probably find that a lot of people won't be able to source this lambing time. So because of these targets, AHDB have got a big research project ongoing, looking at linking neonatal survival and having sustainable use of antibiotics. So there's a little bit of information on the website about this at the moment, where they've been following 40 farms across the UK, and they were reckoning on average they're looking at 9.5% lamb mortality in the first week. But what they're quite clear about is that giving antibiotics at birth, if you've got a well-run flock, then it doesn't actually improve lamb survival or performance. And one of the reasons for giving Spectam was for control of watery mouth. And it might be you've had a bad run with it one spring and then you're sort of scared to stop using it, and I can completely understand that. And it's certainly responsible for a large number of lamb deaths. So it's caused by E. coli bacteria, which is just everywhere. It's in the gut of the sheep, it's in the environment. But that has to be combined with they've either had not enough colostrum, or it's been too late, so they haven't absorbed the antibodies quickly enough. So these lambs, you'll all have seen them, I'm sure. They're usually less than 3 days of age. They get wet around the mouth. They don't suck. They look miserable. Their sort of tummies swell up, but it's not because they've had a feed. And the other name for it is rattle belly, and that's just because you've got bits of fluid in their stomach and a lot of gas, so you can hear it sort of sloshing around. And the other thing a lot of them don't do is that they don't pass the first dung, the meconium, and if untreated they will go on to die quite quickly. So how do we manage this? Although there's this drive to reduce antibiotic use, it's important to remember that we're not saying don't use antibiotics, but target it, use antibiotics when it's appropriate, when it's necessary. There shouldn't be any need for you to use antibiotics in lambs from day one of lambing. So we're talking about bacterial numbers building up as lambing progresses. So think about where your high risk lambs are. So it might be that you have had 1 or 2 cases of watery mouth, which might be that bacteria numbers are building up. It might give you a clue that you might need to concentrate a bit more about making sure lambs get enough colostrum quickly enough. But also these high risk lambs could be lambs that are born to thin or poorly fed ewes that might not have enough for good quality colostrum. Triplets having to compete for teats, or particularly light lambs. And if the lambs are low body weight, again, it might be that ewe nutrition hasn't been right and the ewe colostrum isn't good enough. But equally, if it could be a big lamb, a heavy lamb that's had a difficult lambing, has been a bit oxygen starved, is not that quick to get up and get sucked. So those are all potentially high risk lambs that you need to be thinking about getting colostrum into them, and also potentially doing something to prevent watery mouth. It could be, as I said, that you just haven't been able to get sheep moved on outside because of the weather, or the weather's been particularly bad, and it's later on in the lambing period. But have a think about when cases happen and think forward to next year. Is it a particular shed that is drafty and the rain blows in and the bedding gets wet? And in which case that could be tipping the balance and leading to outbreaks of disease. But use antibiotics only when there is a need. And if you're not sure that they're working properly, talk to your vet. So this is a graph of antibiotic resistance in isolates of E. coli from neonatal lambs. So these aren't necessarily all lambs that had watery mouth, but you can see that this column here is spectinomycin, so that's what was in Spectam, and almost 40% of E. coli's isolated from these neonatal lambs, that the spectinomycin wouldn't kill them. So just something to be aware of. If you're treating animals and they're not getting better and you feel they should be, talk to your vet. It might be you need to do some testing and find out which antibiotic, if there's a better antibiotic you could be using. So sort of switching focus a bit to joint ill, how important is colostrum in preventing joint ill? Well, again, you can get infection that tracks up the navel, gets into the bloodstream, from the bloodstream it goes to the joints. So yes, colostrum is important in preventing joint ill as well. But you will still get cases of joint ill in lambs that have had plenty colostrum. So this graph is along the bottom, we've got this thing called ZST, and that's a blood test that tells you how much colostrum a lamb or a calf has had. The red line is the target. So these are all blood samples from lambs with joint ill, and it's joint ill caused by a bacteria called Streptococcus dysgalactia, which I'm going to talk a bit more about in a minute. So the ones to the left of the line haven't had enough colostrum, but the ones to the right of the line have, yet they've still got joint ill. So this is just to let you see what the joints look like. You can see the liquid pus in the joint there. This is an older case and the pus is now all a bit dried up. So in 2017, we offered free post-mortems for lambs with joint ill, and we got 59 lambs from 32 flocks. And the pie chart shows the different bacteria that were isolated. So the great big red slice of pie is Streptococcus dysgalactia. So that's the most common cause of joint ill in Scotland. And you can see the breakdown of ages of lambs here. Some in the first week of life, but most of them between 1 and 2 weeks of age. Interestingly, when we took swabs from other parts of the lambs, so where rings had been applied to tails, for example, ear tagging sites and navels, we could also isolate this bacteria from those sites as well. The range of flocks, most of them lambing inside, and as you'd expect, most of them housed on straw. So what do we know about this particular bacteria? We know that you can find it in the birth canal of ewes. So it could be that ewes are the source, but also if you think about it, if that's where that bacteria is, it could mean that the lambs could get infected as they are being born. But equally, could these ewes be acting as a source of environmental contamination, spreading it from ewe to ewe, lamb to lamb? We know that it can survive on straw for a decent period of time, so it will build up in the environment. And at the time, this was 2017, then these were the sort of main suggestions for controlling it, along with colostrum and things like that, sort of wearing gloves to lamb ewes, cleaning and disinfecting pens between ewes, disinfecting stomach tubes. There wasn't a definite link with ear tagging, but potentially any wound could act as a point of entry for bacteria, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So just out of interest, all the flocks lambing inside were using iodine on navels, but they were still getting joint ill. A lot of them were using disinfectants in individual pens, but only 6 were always cleaning out the individual pens between use. So scope for some sort of improvement if time and manpower allows. Only 10 were always wearing gloves to lamb use, and only 11 were always disinfecting stomach tubes between lambs. If you've not got enough stomach tubes to disinfect it between every lamb, then just buy more, because they don't cost very much and they don't take very long to disinfect. Some of the lambs had been tagged, a lot of them had been ringed, and when we looked at which ones were sort of routinely giving antibiotics to all lambs, then 21 of them were. Probably if we went back and asked the same farmers again, I would imagine that figure would have dropped 5 years down the line. And some at that point were just targeting their antibiotics to their high risk lambs. So what did we conclude? This particular type of joint ill caused by Streptococcus dysgalactica can occur in both indoor and outdoor flocks. Routine antibiotics given at birth are not protective, and some lambs can get this joint ill even though they've had enough colostrum. There was some evidence, and we have to bear in mind this was a small study because we don't really have this resource to do large-scale studies. They were perhaps more likely to buy replacements and perhaps less likely to use disinfectant in pens between use than the flocks that had other causes of joint ill diagnosed. But this isn't just a problem in the UK, and there's been some recent work published from New Zealand and Norway about this particular type of joint ill. So here's their Kiwi flock lambing outdoors. It's a research flock, this one. And there are some interesting things came out of this just to show you the impact of this particular type of joint ill. You can see the mortality to weaning for the lambs that had joint ill was 14.5% compared to 4.6% for unaffected lambs. The bit that really struck me, and you can see why it happens, is that the lambs with joint ill were 4.5 kilograms lighter at weaning. But then we had this other evidence that's really pointing to the environment as where these lambs were perhaps picking it up in this situation, and that a lamb born in days 3 to 18 of lambing were 5.6 times more likely to be affected than a lamb born in the first 6 days. And where there were cases of joint ill in those worst affected paddocks, lambs born there were 7.7 times more likely to be affected. So we're really thinking environment in that particular study as the source. And then Norway, it seems to be an increasing issue in Norway, and it can cause quite big outbreaks. Again, like Scotland, Streptococcus dysgalactica was the most common cause. And they tried to look for risk factors. And the ones they turned up, larger flock size, high lambing percentage, in other words, a large number of animals. Interestingly, flocks that were observing infections around ear tags and plastic mesh flooring, which obviously not many people lamb on in this country. So they followed this up further and looked in more detail at a smaller number of flocks. So they took samples from 30 flocks. 11 of those had an outbreak of joint ill due to Streptococcus dysgalactica, but they actually detected the bacteria in 90% of the flocks. And you can see in the table the type of samples that they were collecting. So they were taking swabs from the ewe-birth canal, the udder skin, the lambing shed environment, the lamb navels, and the ear tag sites. And you can see that in all cases where the flock had had an outbreak, the numbers in this column here are quite a lot higher than the numbers in that column there. And I think the particularly striking ones, yes, the ewe is looking like a source. The environment, definitely a source. And if the environment's a source, then there is a risk of infection. via navels and ear tag sites. 100% of the ear tag sites they sampled were positive. So I think it's all coming back to, like Graham said, attention to detail, trying to keep these bacterial numbers down. If you are ear tagging, then think about using surgical spirit to wipe the surface of the ear, to wipe the ear tags, to keep things as clean as possible. If you are having repeated outbreaks of Streptococcus dysgalactiae, one other possible route you could go down would be to look at getting a vaccine produced specifically for your flock. To do that, you would need to you'd have to submit lambs to a lab to get post-mortem to try and grow the bacteria first of all. But I think paying a lot of attention and detail to everything we've talked about tonight should hopefully minimize the risk for you. Thank you for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Heather. So many key points there. I think the three talks very much spoke about hygiene and how important hygiene ultimately is in the indoor lambing, combined with health, nutrition and management. So thank you for that, Heather. Would you mind, Heather, just taking away your share screen? Yep. And we'll get all the speakers back. Poppy and Graham, if you want to show your faces again. You have both been very busy answering numerous questions that are coming through in the Q&A. So I will try and work our way through them. And there is quite a large volume. I'm going to give you a minute, Heather, just to get your breath. And I'm going to attack Poppy first on the questions. So there was quite a few actually when you were doing your talk, Poppy. You spoke about the importance of like maximizing nutrition from grass. There is a few questions around protein, and do you want to explain a little bit about the importance of protein both pre-lambing and then post-lambing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so somebody mentioned protein quality, and I guess we distinguish between two types of protein, which is the rumen degradable stuff, and then there's the stuff that bypasses the rumen and is absorbed more efficiently in the intestine. So both types of protein are required. Sometimes we can be too focused on that stuff that bypasses it, because that stuff that bypasses the rumen is absorbed more efficiently, and it's quite a nice targeted way of giving them protein. So we know like soya is the main one in the past that's been used for this, and then there's newer products on the market based on rapeseed meal to provide this bypass protein. But we've got to make sure that you've got that rumen degradable protein in there as well. So making sure that you get the silage analysis done. We're looking, for decent crude protein, you would hope, over 12% or more, like ideally, and making sure you're sort of supplementing that effectively with a good protein feed as well. So things like, wheat distillers are also good, and they do have an element of DUP in there as well.
And this year, when the price of feed is more expensive, as is a lot of inputs this year, should people be looking to the ingredients of what's actually in the feed rather than looking at the price?
Yeah, because it can be a false economy. You can think the feed looks cheap per ton, but when you look at the quality, so the ingredients are listed in order of inclusion. So you're looking at those top ingredients and the quality of those ingredients. And so things like I've mentioned, well, things like wheat and barley, these are high energy feeds. So them being high up on the list, or maize being high up on the list, is indicative of a high energy feed. And then also things like decent soya inclusion, or that sort of wheat distillers grains inclusion. But things to watch out for being high up on the list might be sunflower meal, oat feed, wheat feed, palm kernel expeller. These are like the high starchy ingredients, but also they're not very good in energy. So it is the first thing I would do is try and get the full specification from your feed merchant Often because there's a bit of uncertainty and they're not legally obliged to put energy levels on there, sometimes it's tricky to get that because, you know, if they're out, they could lead to issues. But yeah, just assessing the quality of the ingredients, what's up there top of the list.
Super, thank you, Poppy. Graham, what are your scanning results and what is your target scanning results?
Scanning result this year, we're about 109% are ewes and we're 113% are ewe lambs. Pretty much that figure stays round about there within a few percent every year. I think mainly down to just getting the same body condition and nutrition right on the run up to lambing time. What was the second part of the question? I've actually forgotten already, that's terrible.
What is your target? So are you targeting for higher, lower?
I'd actually like it to be slightly lower. I'd like it to be slightly lower. It's a little bit high at 190. I'd like it to be probably a 185, 180, 185 would be ideal. It generally takes the triplets out of the system a little bit more. I know I'm talking on indoor lambing tonight, but I think most people know that I lamb quite a percentage of ewes outside. And it is important that they can lamb themselves. Uncomplicated lambs are good as far as I'm concerned. And lambs are worth money. Pet lambs are worth money, don't get me wrong, especially in the current market situation, but they are work and they're a lot of time and effort as well. So if I can keep that low, that's better for me.
And in your table, you showed your results for the last 5 years. Yep. There was variable results in some years far yep. better than others, yep. all excellent results. Be yep. interesting to know actually the years that your losses were lower, was that less triplets?
No, not always. I should have said actually that all those figures actually encompassed both indoor and outdoor lambing. It wasn't purely indoor lambing like that. So I think there was one year that they were up about 10% at the end or something, and we had a particularly bad go with outdoor lambing. We actually lambed triplets outside that year. We tried lambing triplets outside and twin ewe lambs as well, and we had slightly poorer results with that. So that pushed that up a bit. We generally lamb ewes with triplets in the first cycle inside and ewe twin or hog twins inside in the first cycle, and then second cycle most stuff's outside. Generally, I think last year we didn't have any triplet ewes lambing in the second cycle. Generally, we get everything in the first cycle that way. So, okay. Yeah, I don't think there's any real correlation there at all. A little bit to do with body condition. I certainly don't get it right every time either. I'm not saying I get it right every time. And yeah, there'll be ups and downs in there from getting body condition a little bit wrong at times.
Okay, I've got a double question. So I'm going to start with you, Graham, and then move on to Heather. So which ewes, you've said that you do your BOHB testing. Which ewes do you pick? And Heather, is there any other tests people should be doing at the same time while they're handling ewes and have the vet on the hold-in? So Graham, you first.
Right, well, I would take it from triplets and twins, and I would take the first 10 ewes that came out the door from the twins and the first 10 ewes that came out the door from the triplets.
So I wouldn't
completely random. Don't select them. Don't go in there going, I'll take the good body kit, because the vet, when they come, they should not only be doing the bloods, but they'll do a body condition score, and you'll get a result back on what they think your body condition score as well is, which I think is really important too, because it's not just you that's judging, and then it's an independent person that's coming in, looking at them at the same time. We'll all body score differently, and we'll all look at it in different ways and have different ways of scoring ewes. So I think it's a really important thing to have as well.
Thank you. And Heather, any other tests worth doing at the same time?
Yeah, as Graham described, your BOHB is telling you about ewe energy intakes, and then he mentioned protein intakes as well. There's 2 tests that tell you about protein. There's urea, which tells you about the sort of short-term protein intakes, and then albumin, which will tell you about longer-term protein intakes.
Okay. There has been quite a lot of chat about Spectam on the Q&A and the chat, so let's just address that and get it out of the way. It's obviously it's off the market, so for people who are using it, they're now wondering, is there anything else they can use? There is quite a lot of products getting pushed more probiotic. What is the advice with those, Heather?
Probiotics, they shouldn't do any harm. I don't know how much evidence base that there will be behind them. I don't know whether there'll be any sort of how much trial work as to in a real world situation as to whether they'd make difference or not. The Sheep Veterinary Society produced quite a detailed document about aimed at vets, but it is anyone can access it. Aimed at vets, listing sort of what potential alternatives are, because vets are allowed to prescribe. The thing about Spectam was it was specifically licensed for sheep, and it was specifically licensed for control of watery mouth. There are other oral antibiotics, not necessarily licensed for sheep. Some are, but your vet will have an idea of what potentially legally they are allowed to prescribe. Obviously, if you are having cases, then you'll be needing injectable antibiotics to treat them. So again, you should have a chat. But it is a bit scary that if you've been using Spectam for years and years and years and giving it to every lamb, then it's a bit scary for it suddenly not to be there. But I think you can probably have confidence, given the reduction in the amount of Spectam that's been used over the last few years, that people are coping with that without any problem. Well, I say without any problem. There will probably be some people that will, unfortunately, maybe for circumstances maybe slightly out with their control, have perhaps a few more cases than they would otherwise have had. But it is really, like we've been kind of reiterating tonight, it's attention to detail, keeping that environment as clean as possible, making sure nutrition is right, making sure the colostrum is there for the lambs, they're getting it quickly enough, and then thinking about what are these high risk lambs, what are the ones that really need to be keeping a close eye on with regards to colostrum. And then if you are getting sick lambs, talking to your vet, there should, I would imagine that most folk will have some sort of flock health plan, and these sorts of things should be covered in your flock health plan. I don't know, Graham, did you ever use Spectam? Have you reduced use of Spectam? You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm busy answering questions here. Sorry, I was busy answering questions. We have used Spectam and we have been using Spectam, but we don't use it prophylactically across the whole board. It's purely targeted. So if we had a ewe that was with triplets that was low in colostrum supply or poor colostrum supply, they would probably get it. And possibly anything that was particularly weak. I think last year we used 2 of those tiny wee bottles, and that was it. So that would be a very normal year for us. But I think the big thing is, if you can get the ewe body condition right and the feeding and nutrition right, and you've got a good maternal ewe. There's a question earlier on about why have an easy care ewe, and there's nothing about an easy care ewe exactly, but if you've got a good maternal ewe there that's producing lots of colostrum and lots of good quality milk, then that's, as far as I'm concerned, that's the best thing those lambs can get to build immunity and resistance to anything.
And Graham, do you use a refractometer at all to have a look at the quality of colostrum?
We have done. It was actually Poppy actually got me on that. Actually, she was one of we test done at one point in time, and we did that. And I do use it. It's a useful indicator of where you're at with your colostrum level and quality. I mean, I think most of ours were over 30. And I think we're up to nearly 40 or something like that, which was quite high, like in that sense. So
and do you use that measurement at all then, if you've been using Spectam, if you've been using that measurement to decide as another way? No,
I've not been. No, I've not. You could do. I think it's just another thing to do. I find purely by drawing the ewes udder, looking at the actual availability of colostrum, and the big thing is it free flowing, high quality colostrum, and there's plenty of it. And you can quite quickly, most of the people that are on here, they're shepherds, will know whether they've got enough colostrum there or not. And I think that's the identification of where they're at. Also is what's the ewe's body condition. If she's real lean, then maybe the quality isn't going to be as good. But I take your point. You could use the fractometer.
Okay. Poppy, there was a question about home mixing. So if you're home mixing barley, do you feed it whole or do you bruise it?
Yeah, whole, I would say, because the more you process it, the more likely it's going to have this impact on the rumen pH. So people will be concerned that some of that won't be digested, but in fact, you know, it's often about sort of 5 or 10% of those grains might be undigested. So it's still safer, and there might be a little bit more waste, but it's still safer than processing them.
Super. And there's been quite a lot about iodine, Heather. Do you dip? Do you spray? Is there something better to use? How big a cup size is best to be used? It has got more expensive as well over the last year. Is the dilution the same? Is it a specific dilution? That's just a multiple amount of questions that's come in into one. So over to you.
I think 10% is the concentration that you're looking for. And dip or spray, I think it's fine to spray as long as you're very, very conscientious and make sure you are covering the whole of the navel. Dipping was going to be quicker.
And for cup size, how frequently you would clean out your vial, stuff like that.
If it looks dirty, it is dirty, but even if it doesn't look dirty, probably every evening. Graham wants to.
Yeah, I'll come in. I'm a stickler for iodine, actually. Like, I love a bit of iodine. My family here always use iodine. So I answered that question. I would change it every 6 hours. When you're busy, I would change that iodine every 6 hours because it gets diluted with blood. I'm very pro dipping. I'd always dip. And somebody asked what size the cup to get. Well, if you get a wee half-litre milk jug carton, plastic milk jug cartons, everybody gets them, everybody's got them. They're real cheap. They've got a nice, neat wee top. They've got a lovely wee handle that you hold, and they're perfect for dipping a lamb's navel in. And there's not too much in there at a time. You go through them quickly. They're free. They're free if you like. We've already bought the milk. They're free. They're really good. We have them at multiple points all over in the individual pens and in the big group pens. So if we have ewes going into those individual pens within the group pen and they're going to be there for a period of time, we'll do them then. So I think it's a good way.
You could just collect them a whole year and then you don't even need to clean them. You just throw them out.
You just keep going. You do. You just keep collecting them up. We've got piles of them. And folk were saying about colostrum. If you want to store colostrum off a ewe, that's the best thing to put in, is one of those wee cups, because it's easy to thaw and it's a nice quantity for 2 lambs.
Any other tips on colostrum? Anyone, Heather, Poppy or Graham, how you would go about storing it?
Well, we always harvest colostrum off of ewes if we can harvest it off them at all. Like if they've got, even twin ewes, if they've got a lot of colostrum, we'll take colostrum off of them if we can. Single ewes definitely, and that's probably why we try and make sure that protein and energy levels in those single ewes going into the last 3 weeks is pretty good, because we want to twin on ewes, but we also want to be able to, best in the world, we all know, will not get every lamb on a single ewe. So quite often the big thing is just get colostrum off her, because it's far better quality than any of the powders I've used, and it's definitely better than cow colostrum, and we've used that in the past. So that's my point.
Yeah, and I think just keeping everything as clean as possible. And don't just leave it sitting about. Get it, if it's not getting used, get it in the fridge, because the bacteria will start to multiply really quickly, and if the colostrum has a lot of bacteria in it, again, they don't absorb the antibodies as well.
Poppy, anything to add?
I'll just sort of reinforce trying to make it as low labour as possible by, I mean, I'll make it sound simple, but creating that environment so that the lamb is more likely to bond with the ewe and stand up and suckle without you having to intervene, get that colostrum quickly. So you're not moving from their birth site too quickly. They're not overly stocked in the shed. So they do all the work for you. And there's a genetic element there as well, and genetic element in lamb bigger, and also in the maternal ability of the ewe.
So we have got so many questions sitting that we're never going to get to tonight, and we said we're going to finish for 9 o'clock, and it's getting very close. So I think what we might do is we'll download the questions after the webinar, and we will maybe make up a Q&A kind of sheet and send it round to everybody, along with the recording of tonight's webinar as well. Just for one last question, a nice short, sharp one for the three of you. Folk that are on the webinar tonight are obviously about to start indoor lambing. Give me your one key tip for success, starting with Graham.
My one key tip for success, keep it simple.
And I like that was simple too. Good fun. Poppy.
Minimize stress as much as you can. So like routine, they don't like be mixed too much. Thinking about stocking densities, minimize stress.
Okay, and Heather.
Just keep everything clean as you can. I know you can't keep it clean, but just think of all those bacteria just multiplying as time goes on.
Perfect. Some super top tips there for you all thinking about starting lambing. I just want to highlight, we've actually got ROSA points for this evening. So anybody who is on the register of sheep advisors, there's 2 points available. So if you can just email me, my email address is on there. If you can just email me your ROSA number, your full name and your postcode, and then I will get you the points. A thank you to our speakers, our audience. We have had a massive audience tonight, so thank you very much. And of course to our funder as well, the University Innovation Fund. And just a reminder, we have another 2 webinars coming up the next couple of Wednesday nights. Next Wednesday, we're focusing on hill lambing. Again, we've got myself and Poppy, but we also have one of our PhD students, and we have got Bobby Lennox. And the following week, we're doing outdoor lambing, and we will have Kathy Dwyer, one of our researchers, and Neil McGowan as our farmer speaker at that event. So please, if you're also outdoor lambing, then please do register for those. Apart from that, I just want to say thank you. I wish everybody all the success in their indoor lambing, and I really hope tonight has given you food for thought. Thank you.